Afternoon. This session, just as many of the other sessions, talk about our products and features and functionality that in some cases are upcoming rather than available now. So please consider the disclaimer. Things can change. Today, we are going to be looking at critical questions for non-IT users to consider when moving analytics to the cloud. My name is Louis Carr. I'm the Senior Director for Product Marketing, and I will be kicking this session off. I'll be followed by my partner in crime here, Adam Luciano, who's the Senior Director for our analytics product lines for product management, most notably the Actian Avalanche product. So what are we covering today? We're covering the considerations for non-IT users as they move their projects to the cloud. Now, we're talking about data projects, and in that sense, this is not new news. Data has been moving to the cloud for quite some time, but it's been an evolutionary process, and that evolutionary process has covered everything from simply moving data storage to the cloud, which is one of the initial key areas of activity or projects that saw the green light. That was largely done by IT. So then we moved to much more of a platform as a service for data, and now we're moving to software as a service for data. And when I say software as a service, I'm really talking about the fact that you're talking about at an application level, non-IT users using that software as a service. Examples that we see every day on the application side versus the data side are things like, Salesforce.com, NetSuite, you name it. Our friends from HCL are here talking about Unica, an example of a software as a service that's specific to a data platform. Well, we have other sessions that have talked about this. I'd recommend you look at a session we have that was the first session in the Modernize Your data integration track, where we talk about Avalanche Connect, which is a built-in self-service data hub that is literally part of the Avalanche Cloud Data Warehouse. We talk about it specifically from the standpoint of a non-IT user using the platform. Another example of a complementary session is if you look over in the real-time decision-making for business analyst track. First, there was a session that really talked in detail about Avalanche from our SVP for engineering, Emma McGrattan. But after that, there was a session by Adam, who's going to follow me, that talks about the critical requirements for a data warehouse as you look at moving from on-premise or legacy environments, or if you're greenfield, what are the requirements, or the 5 critical ones, to move into the cloud. And that session is very much from a standpoint of here's what IT needs to be concerned with. The issue is that neither of these sessions really talks about the relationship between the two. And so we thought it'd be kind of fun and interesting to do that in this particular session. So, non-IT users, what the heck is that? It's essentially the stakeholders that IT works with that are actually using the data to make decisions. So we can think of different names for them. Power users is a very generic name, non-IT user, generic name. But specifically, they're the business and operation analysts. They're the data engineers and scientists. And in many cases, they're sophisticated line of business users, hence the term power user. And what they have in common is that they're all outside of the IT department. In general, these guys are quite sophisticated, particularly nowadays. If you're 5 to 7 years out of B school or a STEM program, even an undergraduate, the chances of you knowing, structured query language or SQL, or knowing Python, or doing some very sophisticated analytics, or using tools like Tableau or Data Robot or Quick Click, or any of these other tools out there for visualization reporting, it's not far-fetched. It's very commonplace. The key thing is that when these non-IT users use IT, it's a means to an end. Their focus is on their business, and they see IT technology as a way to get there. But because they're coming at this from different angles, they have different perspectives, different approaches, and different objectives, really. So when you look at this in terms of asking the same question about how well aligned you are, and this is something that we've recently done, because about 2 years ago, we started doing surveys really focus on cloud migration. And last year we decided, let's do one question where we look at the difference between these two groups that we're talking to, where we ask them all the same questions. Let's ask them one that really starts to look at how they're differentiated. And the interesting thing of this is, now take the outliers away of the one that says having competing agendas and struggle, that's very adversarial. That's a very small percent. That's like 1 in 50 for the IT folks and 1 in 20 for the data decision makers. The other ones is where it's much more common. The feelings that they have are much more normal, typical in an organization. And there is a distinct difference where the IT folks think things are working well, where oftentimes it's not the case with the data decision maker. And the reason for this is much clearer if you look at this second set of questions. So these two questions really point out the difference specifically to cloud adoption for movement of data projects, which is the focus here. So if you see here in this first question on the left-hand side, at least my left-hand side, question number 11, we asked them, what were your challenges if you were IT in dealing with cloud migration for data? And remember, IT has been dealing with this for quite some time. It's not like we just started moving to the cloud, but their dealings with it have all been from infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And now it's much more getting to that higher level of SaaS or software as a service. Their issues are always dealing with that source, right? They have a known environment, their as-is environment, and they're moving to this to-be environment, right? So they go through all the blood, sweat, and tears of doing that. And there have been a lot of surprises for them. Performance hasn't been what it was necessarily expected to be. There's been more complexity and complications than they expected. The costs were not what they were promised to be. In other words, you have to move through that trough of disillusionment into something that works. Now, the flip side for the stakeholders, if you're on the data management side, a data decision maker side, and IT is doing all this work for you, hey, no sweat. I just get to get the fruit of their labor. So of course, over 3/4 of the respondents say, hey, this has been great for me, right? Of course, because it's the destination that's good for you, and the source was your pain, and that's the key. The source is the pain for these data decision makers, meaning the existing as-is environments, the on-premise, the legacy environments. We asked them, what are your biggest challenges with them? And what they've said is the data's too large for these environments. We all expect data to get bigger, but these environments were not designed and don't day-to-day operate really well with these large, diverse, disparate sets of data. So what you end up with is siloed, stale data, and then trying to you end up spending a lot of your time on just dealing with the quality of it. And that has a lot of downstream effects, right? It means that people are taking different approaches to mitigating the difficulties with it, using different tools. There's nothing standard, it's inconsistent. You're using different platforms. It's very difficult to make sure that you can present it in a way that your management gets it, and let alone your management be able to do any sort of self-service themselves. So it's really important that we get IT and the stakeholders on the same page, right? Coming from different approaches is one thing, but understanding the difficulty in the source for the IT people to understand where the data decision makers are coming from for going to that destination is important. So what should those stakeholders do, and how should IT hear them? So we're going to now shift over to Adam, who's going to talk a bit more about how to handle that. So over to you, Adam.
Thank you very much, Louis. So let's start out with an example. So let's say, for example, you have a marketing workflow. And I think you guys are all familiar with working with marketing data in some degree, in the sense that we're constantly bombarded by ads. We use Google search and we use Facebook and we see videos. So we're all aware of those data points. But when you're thinking about it from a marketing perspective, how do you get those data points aligned into a particular place so that you can perform analytics on it? And this is a pretty large problem in general for organizations. And it requires multiple different types of technologies to enable the overall idea of marketing analytics. So just to briefly break down this example, you have things like paid search, which is Google. Display and programmatic would be like your display ads, banner ads that you see. Social ads that you would see like on Twitter, Instagram. Retargeting, which would be if you come in contact with something and then you with an ad and then comes back and finds you. That's called retargeting. Then you have some other items like that. Then let's say, for example, you have those items of data, and as me as a marketing analytics person, I want to say, okay, well, how do I allocate my marketing budget over those different marketing tactics to maximize my return on investment? So the only way really to do that is to get that data into a place where I could start to analyze it, and B, match up that data with how I convert things. So in many organizations, they have CRM data type data sets. So what you would want to do there is you would want to merge your CRM data set with how you're spending your marketing dollars, get that into one place, and then you can start to run more powerful analytics around it. So this could be definitely a difficult lift, and there's definitely a strong amount of or large amounts of data that's going to be required to accurately be able to allocate resources and develop good programs out of analytics. So some of the issues associated with this are you have to generally work with data sources. In this instance, it could be things from the web. In some instances, it can be things that are behind your firewall. So when it becomes behind your firewall, what you need to do is you need to effectively work with IT, and that could be a bit of a challenge. We're going to go through that as in the idea of this particular example. So let's say, for example, let's take a step back and start from step one, right? So you have a project that requires IT, and there could be, if you ever worked with IT before, I've worked in IT myself in Liberty Mutual Insurance prior to working with Actian, and I could definitely tell you it's hard to get resources, it's hard to get budget for different projects. Things get pushed around quite a bit, so there's definitely hurdles even on the IT side. Different types of priorities come through. So, but before we get down to that, once you get through your general business approval, you go through your IT effectively prioritization exercise and getting onto the IT roadmap. So from a perspective of that could pose issues with getting started with your project quickly, because these things tend to be done at different types of cadences. It can be done once a year, it can be done twice a year. So getting into that roadmap so that you can get IT resources allocated to your project to enable something like I mentioned before about the marketing analytics example could definitely be a challenge from a timeline perspective, as well as just getting those resources. So there's definitely hurdles that have to be jumped through that can be done, and in some instances they can be done quickly, but in general, most organizations, I think a lot of folks, at least from what I've talked to, it definitely is a challenge. So how do you think about addressing it? So we have this really new cool thing, the cloud. It's been around for a little while, but it can help speed up these types of initiatives. So before we go into that, there are many different types of cloud providers. The biggest three, we call them public cloud providers. We have Amazon, which is AWS, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. And these technologies can help you get up to speed faster, because effectively what these things are doing is they're outsourcing, or you're outsourcing part of IT to these types of cloud providers. They're managing the infrastructure, right? And they're managing the overlying services and how you interact with those services. When you're instead of going to an IT organization. So that's definitely a big piece of it. So how do you kind of break that down? So from a cloud provider perspective, what you could do is, like I say, I want to sign up for Amazon, for example. I want to sign up for Google, for example. I go log into their website. I sign up with an account. If, let's say, for example, you're new, if you have a relationship, or your organization has a relationship with these types of organizations, you can go through their console. There might be some IT work to get through that, but it should be relatively straightforward. Once you get in, there are a multitude of different services that you can leverage to help get you started in whatever type of initiative you want to do, especially anything that's related to IT, right? You'll be able to work through with these types of things. So it's a different path to get to a similar type of goal. There are definitely benefits to going on with the cloud type aspect. There's a little bit more control associated with it, as opposed to going down your general IT road where there's a little bit less control associated with it. Again, in technology, there's always these types of trade-offs, but cloud is really developed. It's a highly secure environment for you to be able to put your data. There are varying degrees of management in what these tools provide for each cloud provider. Amazon is a little bit more do-it-yourself. Azure has that look and feel of the Microsoft products, a bit easier to onboard. Google Cloud is a little bit more geared towards the data scientists and machine learning and those types of things, but they've made a lot of investments in forays to match capabilities from Amazon and from Azure. So all of them are a little bit different flavors in your journey as you're going through these different cloud providers. There's different key things you want to look for depending upon what your use cases are, but in general, they provide the base levels of set of functionality. It's really about how you interface with it. So you have a sense of cloud provider. The next aspect is, okay, so I want to use one of these cloud providers. How do I get access to data that I need that's on premise in your organization into a cloud environment? So I think this is the key area where a lot of folks might run into some trouble there, in the sense that you're effectively going to need IT for this. So there's a couple of different dimensions associated with getting your data into an environment, like into a cloud environment. It's a lot easier if your organization already has a relationship with an underlying cloud provider. This could be much more of a straightforward type of activity. If it's not, then there's a different type of conversation that has to happen. But in general, there's effectively two big pieces that are associated with this. The first is, how do you take your users that want to access cloud resources and enable them to have similar types of or privileges with what they have on premise in the cloud? And then additionally, how do you authenticate users from your organization into cloud environment so that they know who's accessing the system, right? So some IT organizations will have capabilities to be able to facilitate workflows that make this relatively straightforward. Others might be more of a manual type aspect. The first aspect is integrating of let's say, for example, your single sign-on mechanism. That could be like something like Microsoft, Azure Active Directory. It could be something like an Okta. It could be something like a Google. Once you have that authentication mechanism set up and you're able to access cloud resources, then there's another aspect around privileges associated with it. And that could be helped up via your IT organization. There's different privileges associated with different things when it comes to the application layer. So we're talking about the infrastructure layer. We can talk a little bit more about that. But this is the real area where you're getting IT. The good thing is, when it comes to this, is that in general, it's straightforward. These things are already there within your organization. They've already been predefined. All you need to really do is go through a simplistic type of migration phase. I want to make sure I can connect to the cloud provider, and then also be able to, when my users access it, there are also associated roles and responsibilities associated with those types of users. So this is the point where you're going to need IT. But a lot of the other aspects that we're going to talk about here, it's you could do it for yourself. So let's keep going forward here. Okay. So getting your data ready. So let's say now you have access to your system. Okay. Once you have access to your system, you could take data from let's say, for example, your CRM system and migrate that into a cloud storage mechanism. If you've heard of some of the vernacular things like S3 or Microsoft Azure Blob Storage, and then Google Cloud Storage is another one as well. So you can get your data up there, and then we'll talk a little more about the marketing example in a few minutes with the other types of marketing data, like your Google data, your Facebook data, or so forth. But getting the data ready for analytics now is effectively the next step. as opposed to just getting into one place. So once you have your general data, how do I set it up? How do I curate those different aspects so I can then run my analytics on it, right? And there's a couple different dimensions associated with this. There's the types of data that you're working with, how often they're updated, and where it's coming from. Okay, so from a perspective of analytics, what you typically do is once you get your data set ready, and then you connect your, let's say, business intelligence tool, for example, to it, like your Tableau or your Power BI, and you start building your dashboards. Those tools need to be able to work with the data in specific ways so that's easy for you to generate those types of dashboards. And some understanding of how often this data is updated is important as well. So, for example, on the business intelligence user perspective, they have some sense of when these things are going to be updated. If they refresh their dashboards and data is not coming through, or data is coming through, so that kind of communication has to happen. In general, like for example, the marketing example, it's going to be updated pretty frequently, especially if you're spending marketing budget there. So from an aspect of types of data, so you have data feeds where these things are like files typically. They're deposited somewhere, then you go through an ingestion process where you would populate that data into your target data repository. Or it could be things like web services, and this is more utilized now. These could be RESTful APIs that you work with on the via the web, and that data could be sent or streamed into a particular target, and then you go through your curation process to get ready for your own analytics. So in general, the structured data feeds aspect are typically relatively straightforward to set up. It's typically a target location. The web services is a little bit more nuanced because the data structure of those things can change. It's not as defined as, let's say, for example, if I work with a vendor and I have a specific type of data file structure that I get, and then it comes through, it's typically relatively straightforward and standardized. On the web services side, it can change a bit. And we're going to talk a little bit more about JSON data in a few minutes, but we have to be able to work through that when you're going through your analytics exercises. So from a perspective of types of data and how all of this works and how does it connect into what we're talking about here on the Avalanche side of things, we have your general data sources, and you have things like your SaaS applications. You have your Salesforce, your customer data. You have finance data, like in things like NetSuite. In a data lake, like I talked about before, which is that AWS S3, Google Cloud Storage, Azure Blob Storage, those types of things, or legacy types of data lakes where you have things like Hadoop, where you're just effectively throwing data into it and using it for storage. So that could be a data source that you might have to interact with. It could also be on-premise applications, like we talked about. Getting data from an on-premise application has its own types of challenges. And that also covers things like other types of databases, like your Oracles and your Teradata's or your SQL servers. Then you have streaming data. So I think the best way you can think about a streaming data is almost like micro batches, where you have as the data gets updated, it effectively gets pushed through whatever data pipeline you have into your target area. You might have heard of things like Kafka. Those are technologies that are utilized for things like that. And then additionally, your ETL, that's your curation process. So when you get your data structured and curated and transformed to, let's say, what you want it to be, that could be also another data source to populate wherever your target is. So there are many different tools within Avalanche Connect that enable you to be able to set up and structure the data that's going to be landing inside it, so that you could then take that data, which is now ready for your analytics, and push it through into whatever data repository you want to look at. And once you have it in that data repository, you then have associated tools that you could utilize to analyze it. So from a perspective of how you architect that data, that's a lot of your data engineering folks. They might be involved in your ETL processes or in just general data ingestion type processes. And these users can leverage these systems within Avalanche Connect to be able to set up these data pipelines and populate your repository at the end of it. Then additionally, once you have your repository, your business analyst can connect into this via dashboard type tools, your Tableaus, your Lookers, your MicroStrategies, your Power BI, to be able to create the dashboards and get the most up-to-date data you can. And then additionally, your data scientists, where they're taking data, they're typically doing experiments, and they're trying to determine if there's some data that is level of predictability, and they can use that to push through to downstream applications. That could be things in, like, for example, marketing. So if you ever gone on Amazon's website and you click on a different product and you say, okay, this is an interesting product, and then you go down a little bit in the web listing and you see all these other types of products. These are other products that people buy that are like you. These are recommendation systems, and they're powered by ML technologies. So they're using very large data sets for that sit in a data repository and are populated by all the different data sources that you see here. So these are the things contextually that you have to think about when you are you're getting your data sources populated into a data repository. There are lots of different tools that help facilitate that. So we have from a perspective of getting those things in, we have our general JDBC and ODBC connectivity. We support that. We have something called Data Connect, which is a much more powerful integration technology that you could utilize to build custom types of integrations. We have templates that are built into the web interface that interact with a lot of these different data sources that you could utilize to set up integrations all through a user interface. Let's effectively click through. You could set it up. Let's say, for example, with Salesforce, you populate your credentials. I set up what data I want to be populated. I set up my target. I schedule it. It runs. It's done. So there's lots of different possibilities here. And then additionally, from perspective of the web services, we have a really cool tool that I'm going to talk about in a few moments that can help with some of the JSON data loading. So from a web services standpoint, JSON data, so JavaScript, effectively JavaScript object notation data, could change in structure, and this is the language that web services speaks through RESTful API endpoints. It could change quite a bit. So because it can change quite a bit, there are now nuances to how you do your data engineering to populate your underlying data repository. So how you set it up may not be how it is tomorrow. So there needs to be something that has a level of flexibility associated with how you manage web services related data. So in Avalanche, we have a really cool utility that helps facilitate this. So it's a no-code utility that enables you to interact with different RESTful API endpoints. So effectively, you can get your credentials. You can load up the data from the RESTful API endpoint. Then you could see it visually. You could select the different fields and columns and so forth that you want to be integrated into your end target data repository. And then you can definitely schedule that as well. The cool thing about it is that as the data changes, all you would need to really do is go back into the UI, make sure that you have the right columns and fields selected that you want to populate into your target data warehouse, and make sure you're able to capture, let's say, for example, the new data, or if there's data that's no longer there, you're aware of that and you can communicate that downstream. You can set all this stuff up, press a button, and then it's done. So there's no working with the actual JSON related code or working through to try to understand what exactly changed. Everything's very visual. It's very easy to leverage, and this is a really powerful utility when working with data that comes from web services. Okay, so you go through your processes associated with getting your data from your data sources and into a target, right? So that target is a data warehouse. And there's associated requirements with that data warehouse that's going to be very, it's important to keep in mind, associated with providing a service that enables effectively no maintenance, not worrying about the underlying infrastructure, enables you to easily store everything within your data warehouse, Oh, I'm sorry. It enables you to store everything that's highly accessible for your underlying tool sets, and it takes advantage of the cloud environment. So we didn't really talk about it too much yet, but some of the benefits of the cloud environment is that you're only paying for what you use, as opposed to in a traditional IT infrastructure, you buy a server, whether that thing is being used or not, that's still an underlying cost to the organization. In the cloud world, what you use is what you pay for. So if you, for example, have a data warehouse and it's on and it's running and you're doing your whatever you need to do with it, you're running your queries and you're connecting your dashboards and so forth. Once you're done, you can turn it off, and there's no longer any compute associated costs with it. So this can be very powerful from a business function perspective, because since you're going to be owning this type of let's say relationship with your cloud provider, and you're going to be owning how these applications all connect and work, it's important that you also think about the cost aspects of it, which is really powerful, because you could fine tune it in a very granular way with different types of applications and how they utilize cloud resources. So some of the other aspects associated with this are you're going to want something that is flexible across multiple different clouds as well. So if you choose, let's say, for example, Google Cloud, and you say, hey, I want to move from Google Cloud to Microsoft Azure, and let's say I have some data in Microsoft Azure, and I want to, let's say, spin up a warehouse there, and I want to have another warehouse in my Google Cloud, and they kind of do different things. You want to have the flexibility to be able to do that all within one user interface. So there's something else to consider as well when you're thinking about data warehousing. So Avalanche, as part of the service, has a hybrid cloud data warehouse. So strong performance. So this is the DNA effectively of Actian, where their core competency is our extremely good performance. The concurrency aspects associated with Avalanche, where many different users can connect to it, be able to run their queries at high speed, extremely important. It's also been built with commodity hardware in mind, which is effectively what the cloud infrastructure providers utilize, right? They're using general commodity hardware. There's no fancy hardware type acceleration that Avalanche needs to be able to run really fast. It just runs out of the box really fast. Additionally, if you, for example, in your marketing analytics example, you want to start, let's say it's very successful, and you want to load additional data, you can load additional data, throw more processing power at it. That's a very traditional type of cloud use case. Whereas, like for example, if you were doing it on premise, either you'd have to get access to additional server hardware, right, or you're effectively stuck and you can't expand it. So these are all different aspects here. Hybrid deployment, so we can go to public cloud, we can go to a virtual private cloud, or on premise, and this is a managed service. So when you're thinking about, hey, I don't necessarily want to leverage IT as much, the managed service aspects become a little bit more important. You have your underlying infrastructure in your cloud provider, and then you have your next level up, which is your application layer. And the application layer, it would also be very important for you to be able to outsource some of the services associated with that as well. So from a perspective of industry-leading performance, you've heard probably of folks like Snowflake. Avalanche is significantly faster. This is really important from a total cost of ownership perspective, where if you're able to crunch the same amount of data a lot faster, you could actually throw the workloads at your warehouse. Once they're done, shut it off. You could save a lot of money. So that's a big benefit, as well as the user experience benefit that you get with using Avalanche versus folks like Snowflake. The other additional cool thing about using Avalanche is we have our data integration capabilities built into it. Whereas in folks like Snowflake, you're going to have to go and utilize a different vendor to help you with your data integration needs. So to go back to the example we talked about with marketing, so you have, let's say, for example, your data is generated by your Salesforce. You have marketing, a Marketo type of information that you want to capture. You have generated data for like finance, and you need to be able to unify that. Well, using Avalanche Connect, you could get that data, structure it, and set it up to go into your warehouse. Once it's in your warehouse and the data is set and structured, it's very, very simple to be able to connect the associated tools that you would leverage, things like Tableau, things like Power BI. Avalanche is all certified in all those different things. So you just connect it right up and you're able to run analytics, and I can be able to make some decisions based upon the data that I have in front of me now, with data from the cloud and from the data on premise. Okay, so now that we walked through the basic example, to sum it up, you have marking, you worked with your data, you have your marketing analytics data sources, you have your on-prem data sources, you have the tools to be able to get that data set up into the type of place where it could be ingested into a data warehouse and type of environment, set up in a structured way in the cloud environment, and then being able to connect to that data from whatever tool you need to utilize to be able to start to run analytics and make more valuable decisions with your own data. So the key thing to really think about here is that, where was IT involved with all of this? Pretty minimal, right? So beyond being able to get access into your cloud environment and setting up those users, you effectively be able to do everything without IT, or most of it. Maybe you need some data access into some of your databases and those kinds of things to be able to get access to data that can help with your own analytics. But in general, the cloud provides that path for you to not necessarily have to interact with IT, and you get a lot of the benefits associated with, especially effectively time to market and reducing of the friction of working with things that you can't control. So to sum it up back here, what we have from an Avalanche perspective is you have your data warehousing and your data integration all built into one user interface, one experience. You have the ability to be able to elastically scale your computation capabilities with Avalanche as you see fit. It is pay as you go, so from the Avalanche side of things, and it supports that use case in the cloud. There's nothing really to be taken care of per se. No IT involvement from a perspective of managing Avalanche. Once your data is there and you start working with it, you can set up, it effectively becomes very automated. If there are issues, we will work with your IT or with you to help diagnose them and fix them. So it's a really good thing there. And in general, this is a one-stop shop. So this gives you the ability to be able to get to analytics faster with effectively very close to doing it by yourself, very minimal aspects with IT, and you can get to where you want to get to using the cloud tools, having the speed and availability at your fingertips, and being able to support future use cases as you move forward with the ability to be able to scale your warehouse as well as your integration capabilities. So you can give it a try. We have a free trial that you can spin up. The link is on the screen, and I encourage you to give us some feedback as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining.